Trip and fall, slip and fall, just fall injuries in general are some of the hardest cases to prove for many reasons, one of which is this notice requirement. So, in general, to hold a property owner liable for a fall injury, the injured person must prove that I guess you should back up. The property owner has a duty to keep the property in a reasonably safe condition and to warn invitees, people who are on the property lawfully, about concealed defects that the owner has knowledge or should have knowledge. So there's this notice requirement. You have a concealed defect and the owner must know about it or should have known about it. So there's two ways to prove this notice requirement. One is actual notice, two, there's constructive notice. So actual notice is, okay, there's a defect and someone communicates that defect directly to the property owner. There's the actual notice. Constructive notice, on the other hand, is established when a defect has existed for a long enough time that the property owner should have discovered it, should have reasonably discovered it. So they may not actually know about it, but they should have known about it. And so this notice requirement is tricky because property owners will no doubt claim when someone is injured that they had no notice of this alleged defect. So therefore, they can't be liable. And it's an absolute defense. If an owner doesn't have notice, there's no liability. There's a recent case out of 8th District in Ohio, Cuyahoga County, that provides a perfect example of how hard these cases are to prove. And it's Washington versus Outrage Inc. doing business as Geppetto's. So, as you can guess, Washington goes to a Geppetto's restaurant. It's one he's been going to, I think, for like 30 plus years. And he goes to sit in a chair, and the chair collapses under him. He injures his neck, his back, his head. He sues this Outrage Inc. who is operating the Geppetto's restaurant, and the defense is the property owner didn't have notice of any defect in the chair that would have caused it to collapse. There was no evidence that the owner had any knowledge of a defect, and there was no evidence of any defect in the chair whatsoever. It just seems like it happened to be a freak accident. Someone sat down in a chair, it collapsed, and there's injuries. Unfortunately for Mr. Washington, since there was no notice, there was no liability and the case was dismissed. So it's just an example of how hard these slip and fall, trip and fall, just fall injuries in general, how hard they are to prove and how hard they are to get some damages for a client, because there are many obstacles, one being this notice requirement.